people who were doing theater,
Right.
but I didn't know anybody. What does it even look like?
Yeah,
It's
and what you don't know, you're afraid of. You know what I mean?
In a day and age where Hollywood films have become more bland, inauthentic, and agenda pushing than they have ever been before, with the creativity of fresh, bold, and innovative ideas becoming something of the past, one man has become the golden child of critical success, becoming a blockbuster machine and being the brainchild of some of the most popular and successful movies of this decade. Oh yeah, I'm talking about
Ryan Coogler, everybody.
Ryan Coogler.
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 If there's a face in the league of Hollywood, it's him.
Coogler, great director, great storyline. It's a must-see.
The future of filmmaking.
Hollywood's most celebrated filmmakers, Ryan Coogler.
And he's been doing this while simultaneously empowering one of the most historically marginalized groups of movie production. Wait, this can't be right. But before the blockbusters, before the fame and the fortune, hell, even before filmmaking ever became an idea, Ryan's initial dream was light years away from being realized, but is one that would begin in the state of opportunity, right in the heart of California. But not this California, not in the glitz and glamour of the stars of Hollywood or the lavish mansions of Beverly Hills. Instead, in the diverse, culturally rich city of Oakland, former homes to some of the most iconic sports teams and fans, music royalty, and some pretty kick-ass food.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
And on May 23rd, 1986, Oakland would become home to a young Ryan Coogler. But Oakland now and Oakland then has long been publicized to be one of California's least glamorous areas, one where poverty and crime has run rampant for decades across the city. You see, I can't begin to tell the story of Ryan Coogler without explaining his upbringing, especially with how deeply connected he is to the city of Oakland, a city that would later go on to inspire his first feature film while providing the ideals and morals on which he stands upon, setting the tone for the rest of his film catalog. Oakland at one point had become the epicenter of American industrialization, and following the California gold rush of 1948, land had become pretty expensive for miners and their families, resulting in the neighboring city of Oakland to experience a surge in its population. Railroads began popping up left and right, cable cars and horse cars appeared in every intersection, and with the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, more and more of the migrants that had once flocked to San Francisco had now begun arriving in droves to Oakland. General Motors opened up an automobile factory, Chrysler launched their own plant, World War II gave birth to many war-related production companies, and soon enough they would even get their own airport. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's call for integration in the workforce, along with the dwindling conditions of the Jim Crow South, gave room for the Great Migration that would see millions of African Americans and Mexican Americans move west in search of better living conditions and higher paying jobs. But upon the conclusion of World War II, many of the businesses and industries that thrived at the time began crumbling, with many inhabitants being laid off, sparking labor unrest and strikes all across the city. For years, Oakland would have fallen to financial decline, with many of its wealthier residents leaving, and at the same time leaving behind the impoverished minority class as the civil rights movement also began to pick up a head of steam. The black-white tensions at the time, combined with the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s, made Oakland to become one of the most diverse yet volatile and crime-ridden cities in all of America.
Much death in the Oakland streets. Am I gonna live till next week?
Despite its rough and troubled background, Oakland's predominantly black demographic gave way to a culturally rich city with a vast artistic flair, a jazz and blues scene that would make way for a breeding ground of musical talent that would include the likes of Tupac, Tower of Power, MC Hammer, and Keisha Cole. To say that Oakland was culturally empowering to a brother would be the understatement of the century. And despite only spending his adolescence in Oaktown, the city is a fiber of the being of what made Ryan Coogler into who he would later become. Just like many African-American kids growing up, sports, in this case football, was the dream. Ryan would play football on the streets of Bushrod, incorporating basketball and track as he grew older, all around developing into a solid 3-sport athlete, becoming the captain of his team while envisioning dreams of one day making it to the NFL. It would be in these battles where he would even match up against future Super Bowl winning running back Marshawn Lynch, you know, the same guy who made grown men look like bowling pins. Coogler was exceptional academically. If the football didn't pan out, Ryan dreamed of becoming a doctor, a dream that looked to soon become a reality as he earned looks from top academic colleges such as Penn State, Princeton, and Harvard University for the combination of his athletic and academic prowess. Coogler opted to stay closer to home and accept a full ride to St. Mary's College of California. And while his time at the school wouldn't be for long, a mandatory elective that became a part of his curriculum would lead to a chance encounter that would change the course of Ryan's life forever.
At school, because it was a liberal arts school, they made you take these creative writing classes. First day of class, we sit down and she just talks about how much she hates football players. She assigned us an assignment, which was you know, tell me about your most emotional experience you've ever had in your life. I want you to write about it in prose and then turn it in. And I wrote about mine. I didn't think much about it. I did it honestly. I was in my dorm room hanging out with a bunch of my football teammates and people from my neighborhood. I got a call from her. She's like, I need you to come down to my office immediately. It's about your assignment. So I'm like, Jesus Christ. And I open up the door and I go in and it's just her. She's like looking at me, you know, those uncomfortable silences. She's like looking at me and I'm looking back. You know what I mean? And she says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, man, this is terrible. Like, this is gonna be, like, you know. So I told her I want to be a doctor. She was like, why? And I was like, nobody ever asked me. So I'm like, why do I want to be a doctor? And then I was like, oh, I'm good at math and science, and I figured you should use that if you're good at it. And what better way to use it than to help people? And she was like, And then she grabbed my paper, and she looked at it and she said, well, I read your paper, and it was really visual. You know, while I was reading it, I felt like I was there. And she said, that's actually arguably rarer than being good at math or science. And you should consider being a writer. You know, you can do the same things you're talking about, but maybe even on a bigger level. You should maybe even consider going to Hollywood and writing screenplays. I thought she was crazy. Like, you know, I didn't even know what a screenplay was. I never seen one, but I remember thinking about how much I liked movies. I always liked movies. I always liked to read. And I was thinking about what she said about a screenplay. Like, maybe I should check out what one looks like. So I had $20, drove to Circuit City, found like this Pulp Fiction. And I said, I like Pulp Fiction, you know, and I picked it up, and it was a special edition, and it had a CD-ROM with the screenplay. Went back to the dorms, popped the CD-ROM in, and saw my first screenplay. It reminded me of the first time I stepped on the football field and hit somebody. You know what I mean? I feel like I was at home. You know what I mean? I looked at it and I opened up Microsoft Word and I started to write. You know, started to write my first screenplay.
After some financial troubles that led for St. Mary's to drop their football program, Coogler would once again be on the move, but this time with a whole new outlook on life.
Hello, my name is Ryan Coogler, and I'm a filmmaker.
Despite numerous schools recruiting Coogler, Sacramento State offered him the most playing time while being able to stay relatively close to his family in the Bay Area. Coogler would take every film class he possibly could, with the crossroads of pursuing football post-graduation despite little upside, or taking a leap of faith by attending an expensive yet necessary prestigious film school that would put him much closer to becoming a filmmaker. As Ryan was unable to make up his mind, the university had carved out a path for him, one that put his football career on hold and opened up Pandora's box to a world that was unknown to him at the time.
To the athletic lounge, I see a dent in my face. So I'm like, yo, this can't be good. And they said, you know, it's broken. They could do plastic surgery, which would put me out for the year, but it would restore my face, or I could let it heal on its own. I would have to be out like 8 weeks of non-football activity.
Non-contact.
And my face might look a little misshapen, you know what I'm saying? But it would be just as strong, if not stronger, you know. And how the timing worked out, I would start fall camp maybe a few days late. So I said, man, I'm gonna do that. It was all good. They kept my starting spot and everything, but it was a moment in time where I couldn't do any football activities, and it was almost as if something was telling me that I needed to work on that film school application, because I got so confident with ball that I was putting it off. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
For them weeks, I had nothing else to do, but lift and work out and get that application in. You know what I'm saying? Because I got that application in at that time, it kind of set me on the path that I'm on now. If I had been delayed even by a semester, but I was convinced, bro, it would have been more than that. Like I would have kept playing, and I was comfortable with football. Even though my mind was wavering towards film, it was what I was used to. But I got that app in, ended up getting accepted. Quit balling. I moved to LA. Say that injury, man. It was a big blessing in disguise.
Ryan would take a 6-hour drive and move to LA to pursue his newfound dream of filmmaking, attending USC Cinematic Arts, a prolific film school with notable alumni such as Will Ferrell, George Lucas, Forrest Whitaker, Judd Apatow, and Ron Howard. This wasn't just some ragtag university with a couple of advanced courses and some talk of the town professor. This was the magnum opus for screenwriters, directors, showrunners, executives, just about anything that has to do with media and the camera. People like Ryan simply don't take this course in life. He was truly stepping out of his comfort zone into a world that was completely unfamiliar to him or what he had known growing up. Ryan would find himself living out of his car for the first semester, directing a number of short films with Locks in 2009. Fig in 2011.
Track. You already know what it is.
My daughter is better off with me than she is with Paul or at some emergency foster care system.
All of which received numerous short and independent film nominations and awards. Coming towards the end of his time in film school, despite the praise Coogler was receiving locally, he still wasn't out of the woods yet.
I showed up in film school, because like film school, I think I left out of there $200,000 in debt, and I was on a full scholarship in undergrad playing football, so like so I had never had debt before. You know what I mean? Like every day in school, I'm thinking like, man, this place is expensive. I gotta do my thing. What if this movie sucks and this is my shorts, right? What if this movie sucks and the professors say, man, get out of here, man. Go back home to the Bay.
Faced with the reality of leaving school nearly $250,000 in debt while holding on to what some might call a passion project, Coogler's next work needed to turn heads. And while brainstorming his next film, Coogler would turn a close home tragedy into a beautiful depiction of a fallen brother. Oscar Grant was a 22-year-old California native that was tragically shot and killed by police in the early morning hours of New Year's Day in 2009 at Fruitvale Station. The sheer brutality of events leading up to and the raw footage capturing the shooting created a media firestorm that enraged the city of Oakland and sympathizers of the Black Lives Matter movement, who seen the actions of the officers as being unjustified and further drove the divide between law enforcement and the Black community. With how close to home the events took place and how the media began to use Oscar as a symbol to their cause rather than highlighting the loss of human life, Coogler felt compelled to create a screenplay that humanized the trials and tribulations of someone who was taken far too soon.
I was the same age as Oscar. He was born the same year as me, dressed like me, looked like me on that grainy pixelated footage. His friends looked like my friends. Oddly enough, when casting the film, I cast it with a lot of people that I grew up with, a lot of my friends that kind of looked like his, they fit right in. So I couldn't help but to imagine, me in his place. What happened with the case later on was that it got highly politicized. And people on different sides of the fence. Oscar became whatever they wanted him to be for whatever their political cause was. Some people, he became a kind of cause celeb and this saint, this martyr, this symbol of revolution, the symbol of fighting oppression. He was this activist that never done anything wrong in his life and was executed right there for no reason. And for other people on the other side, Oscar was a thug. He was a criminal. He was a felon. He was a scumbag. He wasn't a human being. He was a drug dealer. He wasn't a person. He was a gangbanger. He wasn't a father. He was just some black kid that got this girl pregnant. And I knew that he was neither one of those things. He was a person. You know what I mean? And I feel like that got lost. Nobody was talking about the fact that this guy was 22 and he had people who he meant the world to. And he's never coming back to them. You know what I mean? And I thought that was the deepest tragedy right there. And I see that lack of value for people like myself, for people like Oscar, when they lose their lives, in urban violence, regardless of who's holding the trigger. And I figured that making a film like this from those intimate relationships that everybody can relate to might maybe help the situation.
During Ryan's last semester at USC, he caught word of Forrest Whitaker, a USC alumni himself, who has been a mainstay in several Hollywood films over the past 2 decades, whose production company, Significant Productions, were looking for young filmmakers to help mentor and develop. Ryan would jump on this opportunity and meet with head of productions, Nina Yang, who fell in love with Coogler's short films and decided that a meeting between Coogler and Whitaker needed to happen. A few weeks later, Coogler would meet a legend in the making. I told him about Fruitvale Station and explained to him that it was the project closest to my heart. I talked about how I would structure the film and about how I was already in touch with the lawyers in charge of the civil case through a friend who was formerly a law student at USC. Forrest said that he would like to help me make the film immediately after the pitch and shook my hand and walked out of the room. I was so excited that I went home and started working on the outline immediately. And after a meeting with Oscar's family to receive their blessing, getting the attention of small-time actor at the time in Michael B. Jordan, getting permission to use the actual train station where the murder occurred, working with a limited budget of less than $1 million through donations, grants, and public support, and shooting the entire film on a handheld camera in just 20 days. Fruitvale Station would premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 19th, 2013.
Mom, you gotta tell her I love her. Tell her I ain't never gonna
Tell her
leave
yourself. The next time you call home, you tell her yourself. Or better yet, let her come visit you here.
Yeah, but I don't.
The movie was extremely well received by the audience in attendance, being praised for its powerful message and compelling narratives and performances from its lead actors, as it successfully embellished the life of Oscar Grant while dramatically displaying the harshness and reality of the situation. The film would go on to win the Grand Jury Prize as well as the Audience Award, eventually getting picked up by the Weinstein Company for over $2 million, before being released in theaters and grossing $17 million worldwide. Coogler had finally gotten his foot soundly in the door of movie making and showed his ability to create magic on screen, but he wasn't finished there. In his next 3 films, he would catapult his name into Hollywood royalty and establish himself as one of the greatest directors of the 21st century. The Rocky series, a boxing drama created by Sylvester Stallone, is arguably the most iconic sports film to ever be created. Documenting the fictional life of Rocky Balboa, the movie franchise has gone on to host 5 sequels to its original. And with MGM Studios reviving the movie franchise nearly a decade later, they brought on Coogler to become the lead director of the Rocky spin-off. And with a bigger budget and a larger pool of resources, on top of another stellar performance from Jordan, who had now become a household name, Creed became a massive success, climbing to the top of box office charts and breathing life into the classic series, with another 2 Creed films to follow, each outdoing its predecessor. But the level of success Ryan reached with Creed would not even pale in comparison to his next film he directed, Black Panther. Black Panther is credited as being the first black superhero in American mainstream comics, making its first appearance all the way back in the Stan Lee Fantastic Four comics back in 1966. Black Panther's birth name, T'Challa, was portrayed as the African king and protector of fictitious, futuristic African nation of Wakanda, whose technology and advanced superiority is drawn from the metal vibranium, which holds almost supernatural capabilities. But with it being the 60s and the political climate of the time, the character lacked popularity for decades. And after nearly 2 decades of on and off chatter from Marvel execs, Black Panther would finally go into production, with Coogler being brought along as lead director at just 31 years old, presenting him with his greatest challenge yet his biggest blessing. Coogler and his team did extensive research on Africa for the movie to feel as true and authentic as an African superhero can feel, drawing inspiration from the original comics while tying it back to other events a part of the MCU. Upon its release, the movie was a massive success, with an insane list of box office records that were broken within the first week of being released, becoming one of the highest grossing films of all time, while also being the highest grossing film directed by an African American in history. Ryan Coogler was on a generational run, being able to consistently create and direct blockbuster after blockbuster, managing to capture the authenticity and integrity of storylines in an era where large corporations and movie franchises struggle to string together coherent plot lines. The connection that he shared with Michael B. Jordan was a recipe that simply could not fail, and Coogler in just a few short years had established himself as Hollywood's best and brightest director. Coogler would follow this up with Wakanda Forever, the sequel that would follow Black Panther film that had to be rewritten after the passing of lead actor Chadwick Boseman, and most recently his supernatural horror film Sinners that released over the past month, showing Coogler's ability to create exceptional works in different genres no matter how difficult or strenuous the idea may be. Coogler today is a happily married man whose demeanor in each interview, despite all of his success, has always remained humble and grateful for the opportunities that he's created and received in life. And at just 39 years young, it feels like we're only scratching the surface of what Coogler has created. But from the streets of Oakland to the big screens across the world, Coogler's story is like nothing that we have ever seen before, and something that we will likely never see again.